Yeah, so maybe we can start with foreign policy. Foreign policy is all about keeping our little red dot safe and secure. And Singapore has had a steady foreign policy based on our national interests. But the world is changing and Singapore is also changing. So, in your view, how has our foreign policy evolved? And also, what has changed and what has remained constant?
Well, both the world as well as Singapore has changed. The world 20 years ago, we were still in a kind of post-Cold War environment, meaning the Americans were very dominant. Globalization, multilateralism, people talk about free trade, people talk about international division of labor. Thomas Friedman says the world is flat. And we were prospering in that environment. Today, the world is not flat. Today, the great powers are at odds with one another. China is playing a much more dominant role. It's become very much stronger in the last 20 years and more prosperous. There are tremendous tensions which have arisen. Russia with the US, China and US, China and EU too. And we are dealing with a very troubled world. Confidence in free trade has also been shaken. People now talk about first they talked about fair trade. That means I don't want it to be so free. Then they talk about national security considerations, which are important. Resilience. What if you become hostile to me? What if there's COVID? That's important too. Then they talk about reshoring, bringing it back home. Do it at home. But that sounds protectionist. And they talk about friend-shoring. I will do business with friends. Now, who's my friend? So it's a very troubled external environment. And we are sailing into it. Domestically, we've changed. In 20 years, we've become more prosperous. I think our diplomacy has helped us to carve a spot in the world. People recognize us. I think there's a certain respect for us. That's good. At the same time, we are very much more connected to the world. In the sense that in the old days, foreign policy is foreign policy, and what's domestic? Well, Singaporeans will leave the foreign policy to the government. But today, you're so exposed. You've got the internet, you've got social media, you've got WhatsApp, you've got TikTok. You've got people traveling. And you've got all sorts of things coming in, and Singaporeans being influenced by videos, by memes, by messages. So your foreign policy and domestic situation has been linked together. So we have to adapt to that, and our foreign policy has to adapt to that. What has not changed, we are still a little red dot, a bit redder, but still little. We are still in the middle of Southeast Asia, neighbors bigger than us, region prospering but troubled. We are still depending on an international rule of law, on international trade, on our sea lines of communications being open, being able to talk to everyone in the world and do business and get our food and our supplies, and needing to protect our interests where everybody is jostling with one another, and we are not the biggest person in the discussion. And we have to hold our own, which takes quite a lot of doing and keeps MFA very busy.
And PM, I'm just wondering, when we say Singapore's national interest, it seems like different people seem to have different interpretations of it. So how do we get people on the same page? And is it time now for us to really interrogate what it means, for something to be in Singapore's national interest?
This is a continuing debate. Everybody says, and is obvious to accept, that your foreign policy must be based on your national interests. Then the question is, what is your national interest? And you have different ones, right? You have national interest in prospering, in safety and security, defending yourself, in being able to do business with other countries when you need to, in having sovereignty or independence to decide what you want to do. You have national interest in specific things, for example, in access to airspace so that your aeroplanes can fly, or aeroplanes can fly into Singapore and out of Singapore, or to be able to set your own path and decide whom you want to do business with and what you stand for in the world. And what are your values? Are your ideals? It's not just bread and butter and can you get your food or not, but when you talk about multiracialism, democracy, talk about integrity of our system, these are things, all of them are national interests. Which one is more important? And when you debate that, it's not debating one abstract principle like sovereignty versus another abstract principle like the economy. How do I weigh them? Which one weighs a little bit more? But a specific issue comes up. There's a test. Somebody probes your maritime boundary a little bit. On the other hand, he's offering to do business with you and trade green energy, for example. Do you get angry? Do you decide to overlook this and then I do business and I lump it? There's no formula answer. You have to look at each situation, and then you have to judge. And in a big case, if you have to make a big decision and take a stand, then the people will have a view and the government will have to take that into account. And the government hopefully will have its own considered view and will talk to the population and we will discuss this. And we've done that. I mean, there have been times, for example, before I took over in 2004, you may have forgotten, but I made a trip to Taiwan as TPM. And it caused a rumpus, and I had to state my position. So my first National Day rally, I had to spend time talking about not just foreign policy, but that trip to Taiwan and why I went and why it's important to us and why Singapore's national interest required me to do that and that it was necessary for me to do so, even though it caused a kerfuffle at that time. And that's the sort of thing which happens. And during the last 20 years, heaven knows there have been other occasions when we have had incidents and occasions when we've been tested and we've had to get people to understand what it's about. Sometimes public channels, sometimes we've had to do it closed doors, and then we can explain a bit more the background and what's it all about.